Welcome to the GreenPilled.network podcast. If you're just joining us, we are building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive-sum digital systems to the world. This podcast features the people who are doing it and is published every Tuesday and Thursday. If you want to learn more, visit our website at GreenPilled.network, where you can download the GreenPilled book for free, join the Discord, and become a member of your local GreenPilled.network chapter. My guests today are Venkatesh Rao and Tim Beiko. Tim is a developer in the Ethereum ecosystem and runs the core protocol meetings for Ethereum. Venkatesh Rao is a writer and consultant. He writes on the Ribbon Farm blog and is the author of Tempo, a book on decision making. He holds a PhD in aerospace engineering from 2003 from the University of Michigan and is based in Seattle. On this episode, we are talking about Summer of Protocols, which is a program that was run this past summer of 2023. And it was 33 researchers, and Tim and Venkatesh were studying protocols. So what would the world look like if we were to take a protocol-centric view of history as opposed to an agent-centric view or institution-centric view? What would the world look like? What would we discover about protocols and their abilities to help humans coordinate? So we're doing a whole series on the Summer of Protocols here. Venkatesh appeared on the Green Pill podcast about 5 months ago before the Summer of Protocols. They ran the program with the 33 researchers, and we've had a handful of the researchers on the podcast. So producing a body of work of podcasts about the Summer of Protocols in order to spread protocol-based thinking. And since I've been talking to Venkatesh and Tim and the other Summer of Protocols researchers, I just haven't seen the world in the same way. I'm now starting to see protocols everywhere around me, from basic things like handshakes being a protocol that help humans coordinate to advanced things like TCP/IP, which are formal computerized protocols. And so I think it's an interesting way of seeing the world. And it's been really neat to follow the progression of protocolization as a research field, not just within the Ethereum space, but we also talk about safety protocols and dangerous protocols, things that are outside of the Ethereum ecosystem, and are establishing different lines of thinking about protocols as a field of study. So I'm really enjoying the series that we're doing on Summer of Protocols, and I think that you are as well. Without further ado, I give you Venka and Tim. Enjoy.
ValleyDAO is an open global collective working to finance and democratize the governance of synthetic biology technologies to protect the future of our planet. Research and progress into synthetic biology is critically constrained by the world of nation-state regulations and bureaucracy from middlemen. But the potential that synthetic biology has for the world is massive. It can produce a world in total harmony with nature. We can grow stuff using cells like software. It's awesome. And the best part is we no longer have to pull carbon out of the ground to grow and maintain civilization. Don't you think we should be funding this? ValleyDAO does, and that's what they're here to do, to try and make the SolarPunk world of tomorrow a reality today. So join ValleyDAO right now and save the planet at valleydao.bio.
Hey, Tim. Hey, Venka.
Hey, Kevin.
Really glad to have you. Excited to talk about Summer of Protocols. So can you tee us off by telling us about the Summer of Protocols program? Maybe we'll start with you, Venka.
Sure. Thanks for having us on, Kevin. The Summer Protocols, it started when Tim reached out to me about a year ago at this point to just work on understanding the broader Ethereum ecosystem and its problems and how to get it into a more mature shape. And we realized that the questions and discussions we were having was kind of too big for just the two of us, or even the larger group of 4 or 5 people that then started having the conversations, so a bunch of EF people. And we thought it would be nice to get a whole variety of interesting people, both from inside and outside of crypto, thinking about protocols in a much broader way than just blockchain protocols, protocols in everything from politics to healthcare to climate. So protocols as a very general framework for thinking about systems. And that's how the Summer Protocol was born. And yeah, we put out a call for applications. We had a whole bunch of applicants, about several hundred, I think, and we picked about 30 odd to be with us over the summer. And yeah, they did a bunch of really interesting and varied projects that we are really excited to be talking about. And yeah, Tim, you want to talk about the EF angle on this?
Yeah, for sure. So like Venkat was saying, when I first reached out, I had some questions about Ethereum, how do we manage this thing? It's kind of a weird project. We don't have a ton of examples to look at. And it felt like all the examples we did have to look at were like very bad analogies. So, people say like Ethereum's like a country or Ethereum's like a web platform. And those things get you like a partial picture, but if you start digging, then the analogy breaks down really quick. And it felt like we didn't have like a good mental model or just like theoretical base to think about protocols. And this is where sort of the idea came up of like, okay, well, potentially this is not just something that like Ethereum has to deal with, but there's other domains where like protocols are a big part of them. And maybe by just like putting everyone together, thinking about protocols and like the challenges that they sort of bring, you can do something that's kind of like the parable of the blind man touching the elephant, or like everybody touches like a different part of it. And it feels very different, but like maybe you can kind of draw an outline out of like, okay, this is this elephant that's actually here. That's common across all threads. So yeah, that was really the main goal. And getting like 30 people from a bunch of different backgrounds and producing things from like essays to code to art, I think helped us paint at least like a decent first sketch of the elephant over the summer.
So how did it go? What were the highlights for both of you?
I think it went really well, and definitely really broadened the conversation we were having going into the thing. So the pilot study that we produced, that's a good snapshot of the state of our thinking before the program. And that was the output of like Tim, me, Danny, Trent, a couple of others, plus some conversations we had. That was the before state. And the after state is, of course, this set of like 30 plus people's projects. But I think a good way to like characterize the transition that happened along the way was, in the beginning, I think we all were convinced this is a thing, but within our narrow sense of like crypto is the primary example of the protocol we have in mind. And within that framework, we agree that studying protocols is a thing. That was our group of 5 or 6 people doing the pilot study. Through the summer, it became increasingly clear that the key question was, is this even a thing, or is this just a random bunch of projects that might have like some overlapping concerns or questions at a micro level, or is there a larger meaningful gestalt here? To use Tim's metaphor, is there an elephant here, or are we literally touching a rope here and like a trunk there and pretending there's a holistic thing? And I think somewhere around 2/3 of the way through the program, a switch seemed to flip for everybody. And this was, I think, around the retreat, which you joined us for a day. I think somewhere during the retreat, that switch flipped. And I think all of us became convinced there it really is, an elephant here that's worth studying and thinking about and like, theorizing about. So I think that's the big outcome that I'm really happy with. And we may not have all the answers to the questions we dug up. In fact, we may not even have all the best versions of the questions themselves or all the important questions. But I think the big win was we figured out there is actually an elephant here that's worth getting excited about.
Yeah, Tim, anything to add? What were you excited about coming out of the program?
Yeah, I think definitely the validation that there is something there. And I think seeing parts of it like actually change the way I think about like Ethereum, which is where I have the most context, shows that it's like, not only is there maybe like a common theoretical framework, but it's like there's actually stuff that's useful and that people can bring back. And this was maybe the other risk is, maybe you just do all this academic work, come up with this big like fancy framework, but that is actually not usable in practice anywhere. And not that we even have a full framework, but like, I don't know, a few of the tidbits that like stuck with me was, one, during the retreat, we sort of had this insight that it's much easier to describe a bad protocol than a good one. So when you try to describe like, why is a protocol good? It gets very awkward and very like conceptual very quickly. Whereas if you try to describe a bad protocol, and the TSA was our default go-to example, just when I say, the words TSA, there's like a ton of reasons that like pop into your head of like, why is this so terrible? And if you spend 5 minutes thinking about like, okay, what's like the root cause for like why all these parts of the TSA are terrible, that sort of paints a pretty general picture of like, okay, those are the things you want to avoid. And just that sort of that shift in thinking where trying to figure out how do you make the thing not bad rather than make it good is actually a bit more useful, because you just have like a better intuition for like what the bad protocol looks like than the good one. And you can think of a bunch of ways to sort of apply in crypto, but the fact not only did like this feel really useful to me, but then that a bunch of other people from different domains were like, oh my God, yes, this is like such a good way to look at it. That was like super validating. So I think it's like, yeah, having a general feeling that there is something here, that there's like some cross-domain, theme or like substrate, but also that parts of it, if you dig in, can actually be useful. And I think it's like, if it's useful, that's what ends up drawing more people in and, wanting to participate.
Yeah, small point I wanted to add to what Tim just said. Yeah, the idea of like trying to define a bad protocol, it turned into this really funny thing at the retreat where people were coming up with like Kafka-esque protocols, and there was like a whole breakout session, people trying to like come up with the worst protocol possible. That's where the TSA thing came up. And I think that's a general feature we discovered about studying protocols, that this kind of negative definition actually is very powerful as like a research heuristic. Like even our starting point, we use the Ian Whitehead quote a lot, which is, a protocol is how do you like reduce operations to like an automatic status? And, how do you reduce operations to where you don't have to think about them? And a lot of protocols is about not thinking about stuff. Like how do you not think about things as a way to start thinking more creatively about them? That makes it like a subtly interesting subject to study. And negative definition is an interesting, I think, research principle we discovered.
Yeah, I was just looking up the Whitehead Advance quote, which I think I first discovered in one of your DevCon talks. It was something like humanity's ability to process important information, operations increases. That's how we create advances in human coordination. I think I'm butchering it right now, but for me, that felt like a very germane part of why protocols matter, is that they help us process more operations as a society, and that advances civilization.
Yeah, so I think the exact quote is, civilization advances with the number of operations we can do without thinking about them.
Right, okay.
And it's interesting that despite the divergence of all the research and projects and people's different ideas of what even the definition of protocols was, this turned out to be one of those strange, attractive things that everybody kind of agreed to orbit. It was like a useful, solid, fixed point that everybody could kind of agree was useful, even if they challenged it sometimes. And I think we discovered maybe a few other such fixed points through the program.
I'm wondering if you all are planning on doing a Summer of Protocols 2024. Is this going to become a field of research in the future?
Hopefully, short answer. I think the idea, so maybe to take a step back, Summer of Protocols sort of came out of just, me and then some folks at the EF trying to chat with Venkat about what problems we had with Ethereum. And then we realized this was, far too narrow of a group, and we needed like more perspectives. And after a bunch of brainstorming, and also one of the things that like inspired me for this was, Venkat, you had this Breaking Smart project a few years ago where you were like working within a firm and then, publishing some of the outputs publicly as you were doing that. So we started thinking like, okay, is there a version of something maybe like that would work in this case? And Summer of Protocols ended up looking very different than, the Breaking Smart project. And I think similarly, like now that we have Summer of Protocols as a thing that we've done, and hopefully in a couple of weeks, we'll be able to like share, then thinking about like a 2024 version should not just say we're going to do another round of exactly the same thing, but sort of build on that. And now that we have this as like common knowledge and like research that we've done, what's the best format or what's the best way to approach this? And it might be you put a bunch of people together and have them think generally, but it might also be, okay, actually, here are like 5 questions we want to answer next year. And maybe some of those questions require like a bunch of different people to work together. Maybe some of them require one person to just like spend 6 months, thinking about it. So it feels like there's definitely a ton of like rabbit holes to explore here and a lot of more work to do. But I don't want to like pre-commit us to like, oh, we're just going to run another cohort with 30 people again because we did that and the results were good. I think it's worth sitting down and actually thinking about, okay, what are the most important questions and what's the best way to answer those?
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any sense of what those questions might be, or is it too early?
I think there's some that like we've definitely had and been thinking about. Venkat said earlier, they might not be the most well-formed yet. But one, especially from the Ethereum perspective, is like just the depth and the management of like end of life of protocols, right? How do you approach that? And and there's probably a bunch of sub questions in that. So for example, do things have to get more complex as like they age and is that like the main cause of death of protocol? Or are there actually examples of like protocols that stayed for a really long time and, simplicity is the thing that got them through? Maybe not. I think, that's the main one that's on my mind and that's been there. And it feels though like to get a satisfying answer to that, there's probably 5 or 6 sub questions you need to start answering.
Yeah, I think one of the ongoing discussions Tim and I have been having is, of course, there's like the practical design of any future version of the program, but what's the sort of like philosophical logic of that? And I think I've been leaning more towards, can you connect protocols and protocol thinking to specific important domains that we know are undergoing rapid technological evolution right now, and we would like them to be more protocol-like than, platform-like, for example. And a couple that are on my mind a lot is, of course, climate is one. I'm personally very interested in robotics. So I'd like to see all these sort of matrix possibilities of like robotics plus protocols, climate plus protocols. And we saw some taste of that in this year's edition. But to connect it to like Tim's focus on key questions, I think the fascinating thing is you can ask such things about like, if the future is all driverless cars, which are essentially robots running around on a protocol, which is the traffic system, you can ask the ossification question about that system. So you can sort of like, do the matrix thing of, all right, if you build a highway traffic system that's going to last 100 years and maybe countries will even have collapsed by then, but the roads might still exist, how should autonomous driving vehicles be living in that world, right? So this is actually an interesting question of across domains. It's not just blockchain protocols, but any protocol is usefully a context in which you can ask a question like, can this be made simpler? Is simplification a thing? Is ossification a thing? So I think we definitely want to like address both of these vectors. And the other thought I had was, in terms of just not doing the same thing again merely because it was successful the first time, but actually leveling up, I always like the Seinfeld joke about like, Kramer writes a book about coffee tables that turns into a coffee table. There's a meta joke over there that, it's a book about coffee tables that has legs that fold out and become a coffee table. I think something like the Summer Protocols, it would be nice to make it a Summer Protocols protocol. And this has happened before with movements. Like, we were talking about the maker movement earlier, Arduinos, 3D printers, and things like that. And a lot of that came out of like the O'Reilly sort of publishing ecosystem. And the smart thing they did was they didn't just like focus on the maker movement and 3D printers and stuff. They also created Foo Camp was the original model for bar camps, and that became like a template for unconferences. And it sort of like created this whole chemical reaction in the ecosystem where suddenly everybody was pulling together unconferences and bar camps, and it became a way the maker movement became self-sustaining. I would love to see that happen with anything we do. Like, can we create a template that self-sustains somehow?
Yeah, one last thing to add on that in terms of like the self-sustaining and the cross domains is like, should there be other orgs involved in like funding and managing this? So like V1, so the EF funded this. But I think both as like a validation that this is like an itch that other people have, but also as a way to make sure that there's, different perspectives that like help shape the content and help shape the questions. Personally, that's I think would be very cool if we could find like some partners who are willing to explore this and have similar questions.
Y'all were gracious enough to fly me out for the Summer of Protocols for a day, and I had a really great time. I remember coming home and talking to my wife about Summer of Protocols, and she's like, "You're really jazzed on this." I was like, "Yeah, there's a lot of really smart people that nerd sniped me." I think it's so cool, this idea of franchising it and making it into something that other people can do, and will be interesting to see as we build more protocol thinking across the industry, how that does that push us towards a whitehead advance? Does that just create good vibes? It's an interesting community to track the evolution of.
And to use the phrase the industry, and it's interesting that for us right now, protocol thinking and the industry are synonymous. We don't have to like specify what the industry is. The three of us mean the crypto industry. And that's a good reflection of the state of the art. But I think if this works and protocol thinking spreads, you'll have like, protocol thinking in the coal mining sector, and maybe Tim Schroff's essay and thinking will elevate the discourse there. Maybe Drew Austin and Chanel, who wrote essays themed on urbanism and protocols in urban environments. That'll create like a whole, I don't know, subculture of protocol thinking in urban environments. So I'd like to see this happen in all industries, not just, the industry.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue into my next question, which was you had 33 researchers out for the Summer of Protocols. I believe they each produced an artifact relating to protocols, and I've got their research summaries in front of me. I wonder if we could just popcorn back and forth a couple of times about some of the research summaries that we're excited about. I know that they're all different, and we don't want to create an atmosphere of favoritism across any of them, but just wondering if we could popcorn back some of the research projects and what's cool about them. So maybe I'll go to you, Tim, first.
I feel like I always use this one, so too bad about favoritisms. But I guess it's such a perfect example of like what I wanted to get out of Summer of Protocols somewhat selfishly. So Venkat mentioned Timber. So his work looked at the evolution of workplace safety protocols in mines specifically. So like, how do you stop people from being blown up or inhaling weird gases when they're in mines? And, how does that evolve over time? And his essay is really interesting because first he goes to that history, and then he paints like a general picture around like what's like a theory of protocols based on this. And I remember the first draft I read of this, the whole time it just felt like smart contract or protocol security in my head, even though I was reading something about like mining safety. And I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but to me, that was just such a wild example that it's not something remotely connected to blockchain. It's not like saying, I don't know, there's this like law protocol that's similar to how we do governance on Ethereum. It was like a completely different domain, a completely different even time scale. He's looking at it on the order of like 150 years or something. And it just felt like I was reading about my day job. And that was like the sort of magic bit of, Summer of Protocols to me, where, hopefully, like the hope is like a bunch of other people from different perspectives have a similar feeling reading something. So I'd say that's the one that had that strongest effect on me.
Throughout the program, I was looking more for like, specific interesting connections more than the individual projects, because to me, that's kind of like a measure of like the sum greater than parts effect I was hoping for. So I'll call out a couple of those that I thought were interesting. One was Chanel's project on addressable spaces. This was a project that looked at how addressing schemes for urban environments emerged. Like we think of like street addresses and things as like familiar, unconscious whitehead advances, you could say. Like 300 years ago, there weren't such things as like street numbers and house numbers. This had to be invented in the 19th century. So she looks at the evolution of that and how that's changing under modern conditions and things like how you can create like almost a fiction of an address space. Like elevators have like series of numbers. They might be missing the number 12, even though there's a physical 12th floor. It skips the 12th floor and goes, 13th floor and skips from 14, right? So that's addressing in physical spaces. And Kia, her project was on the history of artificial memory, going back to the ancient Greeks and their concept of like, a mind palace for remembering things. And she traces that history through thousands of years, and it ends up in modern times. But it got me really thinking about how addressing is a sort of like key feature of like accessing memory systems, going back to like ancient stuff, written documents, print, and so forth. And it's part of like how you live in the built environment. And neither of them is actually the most familiar example a computer science person would think of if you mention the term address. Like you say address to a computer science guy, they'll say, oh yeah, memory addresses, we have these memory addressing schemes, caching and things like that. And this connection between built environments and the history of like artificial memory, that to me is a very powerful theme. And I'm hoping to see a lot come out of it. Like maybe more people will think about addressing in like a really broad way. So that's, there was another project that hit on addressability in a more traditional computer science way, which is Dorian Taylor's dense hypermedia one. And that it's kind of interesting to think about all three of them together. And it's like, what the hell is in fact an address? What's a hash? And one of the things Tim and I are talking about of, can we actually use this sort of informed understanding to now maybe write an explainer of what addresses and hashes are in reference to this more complex thinking we've done, right? So Yeah, that's one of the big connections that really jumped out at me. And there were a few others like that. Like another one, memory seems to be a very strong sort of central link in this idea graph. So Kia did a great job, but beyond her doing a great job, I think memory is like a central hub in this idea graph. So memory also connects, for example, to death, which is Sarah's project on how protocols die. It's like partly a question of how do you memorialize a thing that's dying into like a preserved memory. There's also another connection to Angela's project, which was the experience of a protocol as you journey through it, which is again like, how do you manage a memory and how do you sort of evolve beyond a particular being trapped in a protocol. Lots of such interesting connections throughout the set of projects. And one of the sort of like follow-on meta projects I personally want to do is create a map of these connections, actually.
I think one thing as well, as you were talking, Venkat, that bubbled up for me is during the offsite, we had a lot of people make us like try protocols. So like, and there's a bunch of this that's included in the research as a way for, folks to just, try stuff themselves. And to me, that was like a pretty powerful part as well, because protocols are like these very abstract things, but then if you actually experience them, you get like a very visceral memory of like how they work, kind of like these abstract machines in a way that if you can find a way to like instantiate them and then get like a tactile or just like a concrete experience with them, it makes them feel much more real. So for example, the memory, like people gave us these memory stones, which are a thing you're supposed to keep with you in touch when you have something you want to remember. And I don't know, just like a small thing like that made it feel much more real. So that's, I think, another thing that'll be cool is not everything coming out of Summer of Protocols is just like an essay. A lot of these artifacts are done in a way that, allows people to experience different aspects of protocols. And I think that helps it sink in on a different level than just reading an essay about it.
And to connect to something you said earlier, Tim, like going into this a year ago, we had a set of like bad metaphors for what protocols are. And you mentioned like, Ethereum is like a country, is like a default mental model many people have, and they approach Ethereum governance the way you would approach like a country's governance. And I think this broadened so this is connections from the beyond the Summer Protocols projects themselves. So an example is, how do you start thinking about protocols with other metaphors? And one of the affiliate projects was Mashal. She came up with a little card game to teach people how to basically respect the rules of etiquette and gift giving in Middle Eastern cultures. So the context of the game is something like you're at a party in Dubai and you have to behave appropriately and greet people and give gifts and so forth. So that's the premise of the game. And that game was inspired by Angela's project on like a journey through a protocol system. But that got me thinking, like going into the project, we used to say things like when people asked us what we were doing, we would often use the handshake as an example of very simple protocol that's not a crypto protocol. And handshakes are like a good conversation starter, but it kind of just stops there. Like it's like a cool idea to talk about for a few minutes. And I think Mashal's project sort of like pushes that to the level of sophistication where it can actually become rich enough that you can talk about it as a mental model for Ethereum. So instead of saying Ethereum is like a country, you can ask, is Ethereum in some sense like a party? Like maybe you have to give and receive gifts to each other. Like if you're talking about all these producer, validator nodes and things, there's like very technical stuff going on there. But is there, for example, something like a gift economy protocol that's like softly evolving there, right? So I think this has improved our sophistication and range of reference for how we think about Ethereum type problems, as well as other problems. Maybe safety protocols can be thought of as gift protocols as well, right? So yeah, those are some connections outside of the set of projects.
Well, that's maybe a good segue into letting the audience know how they can consume some of the artifacts, the art, the essays coming out of the research program. So I think that we'll be airing this episode on Friday, October 6th. And I'm wondering, what are the ways in which people can engage with, I don't want to call it content, but like the things that have come out of the Summer Protocols and build that muscle memory, build that understanding of what you've done. What are y'all going to be dropping soon?
Trying to think how much we should reveal here. I guess, yeah, we can probably share the outline. So the first thing is we want to make sure all the research and all the outputs are like freely accessible. So we'll be releasing stuff over time, not all at once. But if you just want to look at everything that's been published and read it all and, do that, we'll have everything at summerofprotocols.com soon in the coming weeks. So that'll be the main place where we'll just every month or so publish like a new batch of researcher output. And then we're working on a way for people who want like a physical version of this. It's kind of sort of a collectible to get that as well. So we'll be announcing that in the next couple of weeks as well. But yeah, all the research will be out for free. And then if you want sort of a little physical artifact, there'll be an option for that too.
So if you're listening to this, open up summerofprotocols.com and everything will be linked there. Is that the right URL, summerofprotocols.com?
Yeah, it's right now the website is still being built up, but you can sign up for the newsletter there. It's called Protocolized. So the sign up form is on summerofprotocols.com. So if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get alerts for everything we put out, including the monthly drops of research output and things like that. Plus other things. We are also continuing. We had like a guest speaker series through the summer that we're continuing now as the protocol town hall. So this is going to be basically a persistent feature in what we're calling the off season as well. So that's a place to continue an interesting conversation. And yeah, the Discord is kind of like in off-season mode, but it's still there, and the researchers are chatting there. So the idea with this structure for engaging with the output is we want to give, like we said, the intent is to create something like the maker scene. That's been our inspiration. So hopefully we'll put out this material in both like digital and physical form, and we're hoping they'll kind of like act like the catalyst for triggering the scene. And then if you get sort of nerd sniped by the idea of protocols, we want to like take people who are like protocol curious and deepen their sort of engagement with the world of protocols. Maybe take people who are like in their narrow silos of protocols and broaden their thinking beyond like, maybe just taking pools or whatever narrow concern they have, broaden to like the broader world of protocols. So point of this material and the protocol town hall, salons, all of that is to get people more nerd sniped, suck them deeper in and engaging in like more active, buildery ways. So yes, and of course, we also want to take people who are like completely into this and build a little bit of what we're calling protocol literacy, like just learn to think comfortably with the core concepts of protocols and make protocols themselves a first-class concept. So yeah, that's how. So we'll be publishing this stuff, and the hope is it'll do everything from like go from 0 to 1 on literacy to take deep people and broaden their mindset, and take broad people and deepen their mindset. Let's see how it goes.
All right, so summerofprotocols.com is the website. Check that out if you are listening. There's also a link in the show notes. I want to end by asking you an incredibly open-ended question, and I feel like it's really appropriate since y'all are both galaxy brains when it comes to protocols. Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to say? Any interesting tidbits that you want to place in the listener's brain as we're wrapping up the episode?
I have one. So we've been talking the whole time around like, it was great that we were able to take 30 people and put them together and actually, get a really valuable output out of it. I'd encourage people to actually check out those 30 people. Venkat and me were like high level coordinating different parts of the program, but like these folks did all the work. On the Summer of Protocols website, there's a little researcher tab you can click, and that'll give you all their bios and whatnot. But I think for like crypto people to say expand their horizons, like this is like a really interesting set of folks. And for anyone not in crypto listening to this as well, like I think just the like diversity and talent of that group is pretty wild. Yeah, I'd encourage everyone to just like literally follow everyone on that list. I think that's what made it so good. It's just the quality of the people that we got for the cohort.
I guess I have something to much more on the philosophical side of things. I think this was interesting for me because most gigs for me these days are like solo gigs. I'm like doing some consulting work for some individual executive or something. And this was throwing me back to like 10 years into middle manager mode. The last time I managed a team was 2011. And suddenly here I was not managing a team, but like, coordinating a large group. And one of the things I was kind of like feeling bummed out about was I'm basically being middle manager and all these guys get to do all the cool stuff, working on the ideas, and I'm not getting to do any of it myself. But I did manage to uncover and start pursuing a couple of lines of interest of my own. So two that interest me a lot are the connection between protocols and time. And several of the researchers pulled on that thread so that I had interesting sort of personal level interactions with them. So Olivia is one of the affiliate researchers. She's written a really nice essay that surfaces the time element. And that's increased my thinking here. And a personal one that I've been working on is a series of essays on just the historical moment we're in. We're getting out of the industrial age. We're in this 20, 30 years into this internet age, and that's moving from the platform era to the protocol era. And we're looking out for 100 years on problems like climate change. This is the 200-year span of historical thinking we have to be situated in. And it's really interesting to think how we do that. And one of my beliefs is we do that through storytelling and narrative. And the very fundamental structure of how we tell stories is changing along with our technology. And I think we're entering an era where we're going from industrial age epic grand narratives, Lord of the Rings style storytelling, to kind of a more protocol-like narrative culture where you're telling stories Marvel Cinematic Universe is a protocolish way of telling a large universe of stories together. And that, I think, excites me a lot. So what I'd suggest to listeners is pick up a couple of your own interests of this sort. I have mine, you have yours, and try and sort of see how all this protocol research kind of hooks into that and makes it, better and elevates it to a higher level. Definitely thinking about protocols has leveled up many of my pet thinking projects by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude in some cases. So very strong catalytic effect.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I think, Venkatesh, since the first episode that we did together, I haven't been able to see the world in the same way. I feel like it's that scene in The Matrix where Neo sees everything in code. I start to see protocols everywhere since I started talking to you about this. And I think I made that meme of they don't know meme where it's the guy in the corner with everyone at the party. And I made the meme, they don't know it's all social protocols that they're all engaging in. And so I feel like I see the world in a new way because of your work. So hopefully we've just nerd sniped thousands of other people into seeing the world in that way as well. Well, that's a good point to end on. Thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This was great.
All right. Peace and love. You just heard from Venkatesh Rao and Tim Beiko. I am excited about Summer of Protocols because I think that if we were going to create more coordination in the world, then coordination protocols as a field of study is certainly going to be something that advances that. Thanks for listening to the GreenPilled.network podcast. Again, we are building a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive sum digital systems to the world. Summer of Protocols, the 33 researchers, Tim and Venka, are an example of that. If you value our work, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review, and share this episode. I will see you next time.